The rain had not stopped for 3 days when Eleanor Ashworth first heard the Duke of Blackwood speak her name. She had not expected him to know it. Servants in Ravensmoor Hall were meant to be invisible. Quick hands, lowered eyes, footsteps that vanished into stone corridors before a lord's gaze could settle on them. For 6 months, Eleanor had mastered that art. She scrubbed hearths before dawn, mended linens by candlelight, and made herself small in a house that seemed built to swallow small things whole. But on that gray October evening, as she carried a tray of untouched supper down the west corridor, a voice stopped her cold. "Leave it.
No.
And stay."
I didn't see anything.
She turned, tray trembling in her hands, to find him filling the doorway of the study. Alistair Voss, the 6th Duke of Blackwood, a man the household staff spoke of only in whispers, and only when certain no one else could hear. He was younger than the rumors suggested, no more than 30, with a face carved by grief and firelight, dark eyes that seemed to measure her the way a merchant measures cloth he intends to buy. "Your Grace?" Eleanor's voice came out smaller than she wished. "You're the girl who reads." It was not a question. "I've seen you. In the library, when you think the house is asleep." Heat rushed to her cheeks. She had broken a dozen rules, borrowing books she had no right to touch, reading by moonlight when her candle allowance ran short. She had thought herself careful. She had thought herself unseen. "I meant no offense, my lord. I'll return the books at once. I don't care about the books." He crossed the room slowly, and she felt absurdly, like prey watching a door close. "I care about what comes after them." She did not understand him. Not yet. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. An invitation no servant was ever given, and therefore, one she understood to be a command. She sat because the alternative was unthinkable, hands folded tight in her lap, spine straight as the poker by the hearth. "You know why my brother is dead," he said. It was not gentle. Nothing about Alistair Voss seemed built for gentleness. "You know why this house has had no heir in 2 generations, and why the solicitors circle Ravensmoor like crows waiting for a corpse." Eleanor did know. Every servant did. The Blackwood line had thinned to a single grieving man, and the estate, its lands, its tenants, its 400 years of history, hung by the thread of whether he produced a son before the cousins in London could contest it in court. "I am to be married within the year," or the Duke continued. "That much the law demands. But I have no patience left for the daughters of earls who want my title and fear my company. I have buried a brother and a father in 18 months, Miss Ashworth. I do not intend to spend what remains of my life performing courtship for women who flinch when I enter a room." "I don't understand what this has to do with me, Your Grace." He looked at her then, truly looked, in a way that made the room feel smaller, the fire too warm. "You don't flinch." It was true, she realized with a small, cold shock. She had not flinched. Fear had risen in her, yes, but something else alongside it, something she had no name for and did not trust. "You will move into the East Wing tonight," he said, rising, the decision already made in the way of men who had never needed anyone's permission. "You will be given the title of companion to spare the staff their gossip, though we both know what is truly being asked of you." Eleanor stood so fast the chair scraped stone. "You cannot mean—" "I mean precisely what I say." His voice did not rise, and somehow that made it worse. "You belong to my house until you bear my heirs. After that, Miss Ashworth, you may have whatever freedom you wish. A cottage, a settlement. Your own name restored to respectability. I am not a monster asking for your ruin without recompense." "And if I refuse?" Something flickered behind his eyes. Not cruelty, she would realize much later, but a grief so old it had calcified into something that only resembled cruelty. "Then you may leave Ravensmoor tonight, in this storm, with no reference and no wages. because I will have dismissed you for insolence toward your employer. No other house in the county will take a servant I have turned out." He said it plainly, as a fact of weather. "Or you may stay, Miss Ashworth, and change the fortune of this house, and your own, forever." Thunder cracked somewhere over the moor, rattling the window panes. Eleanor thought of her mother's cold, unheated cottage, of her younger brother's cough that worsened each winter, of the 3 shillings a week that stood between her family and the workhouse. She thought, too, of the strange, unwelcome truth that she had not looked away from him once. "Why me?" she whispered. "There must be 100 women who would agree gladly, for the title alone." The Duke's jaw tightened, and for the first time, Eleanor glimpsed something beneath the ducal armor, something raw, something that looked almost like fear. "Because," he said quietly, "you are the only person in this house who has ever looked at me and seen a man, rather than a title balanced on a grave." Eleanor did not answer. She could not. But as she stood in that firelit study, rain lashing the ancient windows of Ravensmoor Hall, she understood with terrible clarity that whatever she said next would decide not only her future, but a truth about the Duke of Blackwood's past that the entire household was forbidden to speak aloud. Eleanor did not sleep that night, though she was given a room finer than any she had known, a 4-poster bed, a fire already lit, a wardrobe of gowns that fit as though measured for her body weeks in advance. That detail alone unsettled her more than the Duke's ultimatum. He had planned this. Not for her specifically, perhaps, but for someone. She was not the first woman he had brought to this room in his mind, even if she was the first in flesh. By the 2nd week, Eleanor had learned the rhythms of Ravensmoor Hall from a vantage point she had never occupied, not as a girl scrubbing floors, but as a woman watching a household orbit around a man it both served and feared. The housekeeper, Mrs. Prewitt, treated her with a wary courtesy that bordered on pity. The younger maids whispered when they thought her out of earshot, though none dared meet her eyes directly. Only one person in the house looked at her without judgment: Thomas, the old groundskeeper, who had served 3 generations of Voss dukes, and who found Eleanor one morning weeping quietly in the frost-covered garden. "He wasn't always like this," Thomas said, raking leaves he did not need to rake, giving her the privacy of his turned back. "The Duke, I mean. Before the fever took his brother. Before the accident took his father not 4 months after." "What was he like?" Eleanor asked, surprising herself with how badly she wanted to know. "Soft," Thomas said, and the word seemed to cost him something. "Softer than a duke's son has any right to be. He used to read poetry to the tenant children. Paid for the doctor when old Mrs. Hale's leg turned bad, quiet-like, so no one would think him weak for it." He paused, leaning on his rake. "Grief does strange things to soft men, Miss Ashworth. Sometimes it doesn't harden them. Sometimes it just teaches them to hide the softness where no one can wound it again." Eleanor turned that thought over for days, unable to reconcile it with the man who had issued her an ultimatum by firelight, as though negotiating the sale of livestock. She saw him rarely, and always briefly, a passing figure in the corridor, a silhouette at dinner that ended in silence more often than conversation. He did not press her. He did not visit her chamber. Whatever cruelty had shaped his demand, he seemed, strangely, unwilling to enforce its most obvious implication without her willing presence at his side first. It was during the 3rd week that Eleanor discovered the locked door at the end of the portrait gallery, a room the staff avoided so pointedly that its avoidance itself became conspicuous. She asked Mrs. Prewitt about it once, and the housekeeper's face closed like a shutter. "The old nursery," was all she said. "Best left be. A nursery. In a house without an heir, without a duchess, without children for 2 generations. Eleanor's curiosity, that old dangerous habit that had first drawn the Duke's attention to her, would not let the matter rest. She found the key by accident tucked behind a loose stone in the library hearth, where she had gone hunting for another borrowed book. That night, candle in hand, she unlocked the nursery door. Inside, dust sheets covered a cradle, a rocking horse, small shelves of children's books untouched in what looked like decades. But it was the portrait above the cold fireplace that stopped her breath. A young woman with Eleanor's own dark hair and startling pale eyes, holding an infant, her smile aimed at someone just outside the frame. That was my mother. The Duke's voice came from the doorway, quiet as smoke. Eleanor spun, heart hammering, caught somewhere she had no right to be. Your Grace, She died bearing my younger brother. He stepped into the room, his eyes fixed on the portrait rather than on her, and for the first time, Eleanor saw something in him that was not command, not grief calcified into coldness, but simple, unguarded sorrow. My father never forgave the loss. He never entered this room again in 26 years. He never remarried, though the solicitors begged him to secure the line. Is that why you... Eleanor stopped herself. Why I speak of heirs as though they were ledger entries rather than children. A humorless smile touched his mouth. Perhaps. I have spent my whole life watching what love costs this family. My mother, dead in this room. My father, hollowed out by grief until an apoplexy took him in his sleep. My brother, his voice caught, the first true crack Eleanor had heard in his composure. My brother did not die of fever, Miss Ashworth. That is the story told to the tenants and the solicitors alike. Eleanor went very still. Then how? The Duke's eyes finally left the portrait and found hers, and in them she saw something that chilled her far more than any ultimatum spoken by firelight. A secret so carefully buried that its weight had reshaped the man carrying it. He took his own life, the Duke said, 3 days after the woman he loved was married off to a marquis by her father, for a settlement twice the size of what I could offer as a second son with no title yet to my name. And I have spent every day since asking myself whether love is a luxury this family can survive twice more, or whether cold arrangement, however cruel it seems to you, might be the only mercy I have left to offer the next generation of Voss children. Thunder did not crack this time, but Eleanor felt something shift regardless. The ground beneath her understanding of this man tilting, reshaping itself into something far more complicated than the cruel Duke of the household's whispers. That is not mercy, she said quietly, before she could stop herself. That is fear wearing mercy's clothes. The Duke's jaw tightened, but he did not deny it. And in his silence, Eleanor understood that she had just glimpsed a truth about Alistair Voss that even his own household did not know, and that the real danger at Ravensmoor Hall was not the arrangement he had forced upon her, but the buried history that arrangement was built to outrun. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, carried by a rider soaked through from the moor, and it changed the temperature of Ravensmoor Hall before Eleanor even learned its contents. She found the Duke in his study afterward, the paper crushed in his fist, his face drained of the careful control she had come to expect from him. My cousin, he said, before she could ask. Reginald Voss. He arrives Thursday, with a solicitor from Chancery and, I have no doubt, a case prepared to contest my claim to Ravensmoor the moment he believes me vulnerable. On what grounds? You are the Duke. The title is yours by right of succession. The title, yes. The estate's unentailed lands are another matter, and Reginald has spent 3 years arguing before the Court of Chancery that my father's will was altered under duress in his final illness. Duress he claims I engineered. The Duke's voice was tight with a fury Eleanor had not yet heard from him. He needs only enough doubt to freeze the estate in litigation for a decade, and a Duke without an heir, entertaining rumors of an irregular arrangement with a servant in his household, hands him precisely the doubt he requires. Eleanor's stomach turned cold. He knows about me. Ravensmoor has ears in every village from here to London, Miss Ashworth. Of course he knows. She should have felt only fear for herself, her reputation, her family's shillings, the workhouse looming at the edge of every calculation she had made since October. But what rose in her instead, sharp and unwelcome, was fear for him. For the grief-hollowed man who had shown her a locked nursery and a dead mother's portrait, who carried his brother's suicide like a stone sewn into his chest. Reginald Voss arrived Thursday exactly as promised, and Eleanor understood within the hour why the Duke's fury ran so deep. Where Alistair was contained, quiet, weighted by sorrow, his cousin was all easy smiles and careless cruelty, the kind of man who mistook charm for kindness because no one had ever corrected him. "So this is the companion," Reginald said at dinner, eyes moving over Eleanor with an assessment that made her skin crawl in a way the Duke's had never managed. Ashworth, was it? A curious name. My solicitor tells me there was an Ashworth in service to the old Duke, some 25 years past. A lady's maid, I believe, dismissed rather suddenly. His smile sharpened. Your mother, perhaps? The room went very still. Eleanor felt the Duke's gaze snap to her, felt her own pulse stumble. I don't know what you mean, she said carefully, though something cold and unformed was uncoiling in her chest. A memory of her mother's face whenever Ravensmoor Hall was mentioned in passing, a flinch quickly hidden, a subject always changed. No matter. Reginald waved the thread away as though it bored him, though Eleanor did not believe for a moment that it did. I only mention it because histories have a way of repeating in this house, don't they, cousin? Servants and dukes. It seems to be something of a family tradition. The Duke's knuckles whitened around his wineglass. Say what you mean to say, Reginald, and spare us both the theater. Very well. Reginald set down his fork with theatrical precision. I mean to say that a duke keeping a servant as his mistress, under the pretense of a companionship, while unmarried and without legitimate prospects of an heir, is precisely the kind of scandal that persuades a chancery judge a man's judgment cannot be trusted with an estate of this size. I mean to say that I have depositions ready from 3 members of your staff describing the arrangement in considerably less flattering terms than you might. And I mean to say, cousin, that you have 1 month to either marry appropriately and produce a legitimate path to an heir, or relinquish the unentailed lands to spare this family further embarrassment before the court. The threat hung over the table like the storm that never seemed to fully leave the moor. That night, Eleanor could not sleep. Reginald's words about her mother circled endlessly, dredging up fragments she had buried without realizing it. Her mother's unexplained fear of grand houses, a small portrait miniature kept hidden in a drawer that Eleanor had once glimpsed and never been permitted to examine. The strange, sad way her mother's face changed whenever the Voss name was mentioned in the village. She went to the nursery again, past midnight, and stood before the portrait of the Duke's mother. Dark hair, pale eyes, a face that could have been Eleanor's own, reflected through 25 years of glass. You see it too. The Duke stood in the doorway again, as he had before, as though the room summoned him whenever Eleanor entered it. I don't understand what I'm seeing, Eleanor whispered. Your cousin implied. I know what he implied. The Duke crossed to stand beside her before the portrait, close enough that she felt the warmth of him rather than merely the cold command she had first met in his study. I had my solicitor send an inquiry to the parish records the moment Reginald departed. I did not tell you because I did not wish to give you a hope that might yet prove false, or a fear that might prove true. And your mother, Sarah Ashworth, was in service here as lady's maid to my mother, the Duchess, 26 years ago. His voice was very careful now, very controlled, in the manner of a man handling something that might shatter. She was dismissed 8 months before my brother's birth, not for insolence, as the household records claim, but by my father's own hand, quietly. with a settlement large enough to raise questions if anyone had thought to ask them. Eleanor's breath caught. "You think my mother and your father—" "I think," the Duke said quietly, "that you may be my half-sister, Eleanor. Or you may simply resemble a portrait through pure, cruel coincidence. I do not know which answer I am hoping for, and that uncertainty frightens me more than Reginald's chancery suit ever could." The fire popped in the grate, and outside, thunder rolled once more over Ravensmoor's ancient stones. Eleanor stared at the painted eyes so like her own, and understood that whatever answer the parish records eventually revealed, the arrangement the Duke had forced upon her in October could no longer stand. Not as it was, not with this shadow now stretched between them, and not with Reginald Voss circling the estate like a crow that had finally scented the truest scandal of all. The parish records arrived by courier 2 days later, and Eleanor stood beside the Duke in his study as he broke the seal with hands that were not entirely steady. She had spent those 2 days in a strange, suspended grief, mourning a father she might never have known, mourning a future with a man she had, despite every instinct toward caution, begun to care for far beyond the terms of any arrangement. She had watched him across the dinner table and searched his face for some echo of her own, terrified of finding it, terrified of not. The Duke read in silence, and Eleanor watched relief and something more complicated wore across his features. "You are not my sister," he said finally, looking up at her. "Your mother was dismissed not for bearing a child of my father's, but for something else entirely. The vicar's notes are explicit. She was dismissed because she discovered my father's affair with a woman of the village, Grace Hale, a widow, whom my father supported quietly for years afterward, including the daughter born of that arrangement. Your mother was paid for her silence, Eleanor, not for her shame." Eleanor sat down hard in the chair across from his desk, the same chair she had first occupied in October, trembling under the weight of an ultimatum. Then the resemblance is coincidence, or distant blood through some branch of the family tree neither of us will likely ever trace. The Ashworths and the Voss line crossed generations ago, in the ordinary way old country families do. The Duke set down the letter, and something in his shoulders loosened for the first time since Eleanor had known him. "You are not my sister, Eleanor. You never were." The relief that flooded her was so sharp it left her briefly breathless, and beneath it, unmistakably something warmer, something she had been refusing to name since the night in the nursery, since a man had shown her his dead mother's portrait and the truth of his brother's despair, and asked nothing of her in return but her understanding. "There is still Reginald," she said, because someone had to say it. "There is still Reginald," the Duke agreed, "and there is still the arrangement I forced upon you, which I find I can no longer bear to call by that name." He came around the desk and knelt before her chair, an act so far beneath a Duke's dignity that Eleanor's breath caught entirely. "I have spent this household's history watching love destroy the people who possessed it," he said quietly. "My mother, dead for it. My father, hollowed by its loss. My brother, undone entirely. I built a wall of cold arrangement because I believed it was the only mercy I had left to offer. A way to secure this family's future without risking what love had cost every generation before me." He took her hand, and Eleanor did not pull away. "I was wrong, Eleanor. Not about the danger, but about the mercy. There is no mercy in a life without you in it, arrangement or otherwise." "And Reginald's suit? The scandal?" "Reginald wanted a servant kept as a mistress in shadow and silence. He did not prepare for a duke who married the woman he loved, openly before the entire county, with a marriage settlement drawn so carefully no chancery judge alive could call it duress." A ghost of the old commanding certainty returned to his voice, though gentler now, offered rather than imposed. "Marry me, Eleanor. Not because Ravensmoor requires an heir. Not because a cousin circles the estate like a crow. Marry me because I have watched you walk through this house for 5 months with more courage than any title I possess, and because I would rather lose every unentailed acre to Reginald Voss than lose you to the cold arrangement I was fool enough to offer you in October." Eleanor thought of the frightened girl who had carried an untouched supper tray down the west corridor, certain her life belonged to whatever terms this house imposed upon her. She thought of the locked nursery, the dead mother's portrait, the brother's grief-soaked despair, the long line of Voss men who had mistaken control for safety. "I came to this house belonging to no one but my own necessity," she said softly. "If I stay now, Alistair, I stay because I choose it. Not because you commanded it, and not because Ravensmoor requires it of me." "Then choose it," he said, "and I will spend whatever life remains to me proving I was worth the choosing." "Yes," Eleanor said, and felt the words settle over 5 months of fear and firelight, like the first true warmth of spring. "Yes, I will marry you." The wedding took place before winter's end, quiet and swift enough to leave Reginald Voss no room for legal maneuvering, and loud enough in its genuine happiness that even the most hardened members of the household staff wept openly at the ceremony. Mrs. Prewitt cried into her handkerchief. Thomas the groundskeeper claimed later it was only the cold making his eyes water, though no one believed him. Reginald's chancery suit collapsed within the year, starved of the scandal it had depended upon, and he retreated to London to nurse his ambitions elsewhere. The nursery at Ravensmoor Hall was opened at last, aired and cleaned and filled. In time, with the sound of children's laughter, it had been denied for a generation. Eleanor never did learn the precise thread connecting her family to the Voss line generations past, and in time, she stopped searching for it. Some mysteries, she came to understand, mattered less than the truth standing plainly in front of you. A grieving man learning, slowly, that love was not the family curse he had once believed it to be, but the one inheritance worth risking everything to claim. She often thought back to that rain-soaked October evening, to a duke's growled ultimatum in a firelit study, and wondered how a demand born entirely of fear had somehow become the doorway to the first true home she had ever known.